My name is Miriam Basilio, and this is Danielle Nesta. She's the other curator. We also have some wonderful undergrads who since graduated, who participated in a seminar in the art history department about art and propaganda. And we taught it in 2019 in the archive because we have this phenomenal collection of wonderful objects that were brought back from the veterans or by the families of the veterans of the Abraham Lincoln Brigade, who were 2,800 people who generously gave of their time and some of their lives to defend democracy in Spain. And we also have the papers of the Medical Bureau. There was a lot of humanitarian assistance that was provided coming from the U.S. as well. And they're just really beautiful stories of their lives, but it's also by saving these fragile kind of relics, they're helping us to tell the story of the war as well. So there's more than one story kind of happening at once. And when we offered the class, it was during the election, of course, and so we wanted the students to kind of reflect on, propaganda of today, memes, social media, disinformation, all of that stuff, so that they could be critical thinkers. And later, we've seen that similar to what happened in Spain, there was an election and a group of people did not respect the results of an election. In Spain, it was in February of 1936 when there was a republic and a progressive coalition of parties grouped together as the Popular Front. Some of them were also very extreme, like communists and anarchists, who also joined in. So it was a group of people strategically joined together to fight, against the reactionary sectors of Spanish society. And so a group of military members led by Francisco Franco actually rose up in arms. So kind of, luckily January the 6th stopped there, but in Spain it led to a war that ended in 1939 when General Franco's forces, assisted by Mussolini, won the war. And then, as probably all of you know, we had a dictatorship in Spain until 1975 when he died. So these things are even more valuable because for many years they weren't even allowed to be, distributed in Spain or seen in Spain, and people were keeping them in safekeeping. And there's some things here that I've never seen in the Spanish archive. I mean, we have someone here who's an expert. We have two people here who are experts on the war, Georgiana Mendelssohn and Juan Jose La Huerta, who can probably correct me or tell me, like, I've never seen that before. But basically, it was very lovely to work with the students, and they learned how to look at archival material and then how to contextualize it historically, and then they came up with the themes. So each window has a theme that reflects the experience of the war. The Second Republic had a flag that was made up of three colors: red, yellow, and purple. And so that's the color palette for the show. And so it's designed in a way so that when you walk along the windows, you construct the flag yourself in your own mind, in your own reflection. So you're kind of like thinking of the memories of the war that they were carrying with them, literally, when they were bringing these objects. And that hopefully people will take something away from this fascinating and inspirational historical moment. Yeah. Does anybody have any questions about things, because I can get into this like professor mode? And also Danielle knows a lot, and it was great to teach with her because she, being the archivist, knew what was inside of each of the folders, and she would say, we should look at so-and-so's files because there's a great letter. It was incredible to work with her.
Thank you so much. I always see my role as kind of being the guide to help the students understand how to navigate the archive. That's not always something that comes really naturally to students, especially undergraduates, because they're often their first time going into an archive and navigating a space that they don't necessarily know a lot about. It's very easy for them to feel kind of afraid and intimidated by these collections and feel like, am I doing serious enough work? Am I engaging with the materials enough? Am I scholarly enough to do this? And what I see my job as doing is kind of being that bridge for them, showing them that they have the power to do this on their own, that it's okay to ask for help, and it's okay to ask questions. It's okay to disagree with what an archivist may have said about these materials or how they decided to arrange and describe them, and to really lend their own curatorial voice to these materials. This class is particularly important to me, not only because of the subject matter and getting to work with Miriam, but also because this was the type of class that actually got me interested in becoming an archivist in the first place. I was fortunate enough to do the same type of thing at my undergraduate institution, Boston College, And so I could see the power behind this type of work, showing students that there's other ways to engage with historical materials or to engage with an archive in general. So I really wanted to make sure that they had that full experience and felt that this was a place for them and that they had something important to add to the historical narrative. So I hope that work is reflected in the decisions that the students made and the writing that they produced themselves. Miriam and I were not ghostwriters. We were not the ones coming up with this content. This was all driven by the students and their interests. It was a really collaborative effort, and I'm really grateful for the opportunity that I've had to engage with the students in this way.
It was like a dream of mine when I first started teaching here in 2005. I wanted to do a show with students, and with this material. And this material is so moving to me personally because my father was born in Spain, and my grandfather, his brother, and the brothers on my grandmother's side as well. They all fought against Franco. They were all politicized. They were members of Popular Front parties. One of them was imprisoned for quite a few years, and so I never heard about the stories because they were too traumatized to talk about it. My family members, they didn't want to talk about it. So whenever I would go to the events when I was a young student, and the veterans we still had quite a few veterans with us. I don't know if any of you ever went to events with the Abraham Lincoln Brigade vets, but I would just look at them and I would think, wow, like they're like my grandfather. They did this for us, and so to me, this is just that's like a dream to be able to kind of uplift what they did for us.
Yeah, and so having those personal connections and having that story really showed how the archivists were brought to life and how, this is not just something that exists in history. This is something that's very present. It has a lot of pull to it. And so, I think it's really great that the students got the chance to engage with the material in such a profound and close way. Obviously, the exhibit was much more delayed than we hoped that it might be.
Indeed.
This was supposed to go up in March of 2020, but the day that we were set to install was the day that everything shut down. So we actually have the opportunity to present this all to you now, and we're grateful for you all being here.
So we have these very incredible materials. Like I said, some of them I've never seen in other places. But for example, to make it more concrete, what the Popular Front Coalition had in common was one of the things was that they were supporting women's rights, the right to have a divorce, the right in the case of Catalonia, the region of Catalonia, they actually made abortion legal during the war. So there were a lot of reforms, and some women actually volunteered to go fight themselves, although that was frowned upon early on because it was felt that it would create some kind of disorder. So for example, this is a very unusual reproduction of a postcard, and it's saying, to win the war, take care of your own health, and then it's sort of presenting the woman fighter as this temptress who can be careful with venereal disease. So there's a lot of really interesting things also with the postcards because they circulated widely. We have many of them in the archive, and you can imagine these soldiers, they're losing the war, they have no food, they've been wounded, they're being evacuated from Spain, and they take these postcards with them wherever they can carry them, so they were really, as much as the posters, which were on the walls, of course, and magazines and broadsheets, the postcards were really, really important. And we have somebody here who's an expert on the postcards. He's written a lot about it, Jordana Mendelsohn, who's a professor, who also teaches with us in the archive very often. So it's really incredible how these messages were also kind of traveling hand by hand and from the front to the rear, and also being sent out around the world. So you'll see, for example, there's different languages. Like this one, asking for 100,000 volunteers, is addressed to women in Spanish. And then this one here is in the language of the region of Catalonia, Catalan, in the Catalan language, telling women this beautiful photographic reproduction of women in a factory. So this is, I think, one of the really fascinating parts of the war, how the role of women changed during the war. And for example, when my mom married my dad, you couldn't have a civil wedding; it had to be in a church. And women couldn't carry a passport without the permission of the husband. And there was no divorce. This is during the dictatorship. So this is what these people tried to, create separation of church and state, other things like that, and it was thwarted when the war was lost.
Yes.
And are sort of a graphic explanation of what I was saying before, that there was a popular front coalition of different parties and also labor unions, communists, anarchists, socialists, parties that were similar to what the U.S. Democratic Party believes in, more moderate parties. So they were all united, and they had their political differences, but throughout the war they tried their best to they realized that the enemy was the fascists who had led the coup and who, as I said, were being backed by Mussolini and Hitler. So this is why they lost the war, because not only were they divided among themselves about how to run the war and what the goal was, but also most importantly because Mussolini and Hitler were providing arms. They were engaging in bombardments, which some of you probably have heard of the bombing of Guernica that inspired Picasso's painting. So these carpet bombings of civilian areas in many cases that they were testing out, and then of course continued to carry on during World War II. So Spain was kind of the laboratory for that, and a lot of the people who volunteered from the U.S. were members of the Communist Party. They were trade unionists. They were Jewish because they saw the rise of anti-Semitism and they felt like we had to stop it in Spain. Otherwise, it would escalate to as it did. So, like, this is just one example of this military man, but he's a composite of different flags: the flag of the Republic, the flag of the Basque region, the flag of the Catalan region, Valencia, the Communist Party, the anarchists. So it's like they're trying to make this very kind of graphic brand. One important thing is that many people were not able to read or write. In that generation, like my grandmother, for example, it's about 33% literacy rate. And a lot of these people were actually fine artists, and some of them were also graphic artists, so worked as cartoonists, and so they were really good about thinking about a visual brand. There's actually one person who wrote about the sort of psychological impact of advertising and branding, and talking about how you could apply that to the war. So they were very sophisticated about this and thinking about how you could take an image like that one there. You see the two hands, workers' unity, and the socialist trade union and the anarchist trade union, saying we have to stamp out fascism. And so they're very beautiful and engaging. Well, I don't know if you think so, but I think that they're very well thought out to try to appeal to a broad audience.
And I think one of the things that's really striking me about all of these windows is how the students have to make so many decisions. We do have such a wealth of information in the archives, and all of these come from different collections. These are our poster collections, our postcard collections. I think actually all these are postcard collections. But the students had to really think critically about which images are going to be the most striking to our audience. Who's going to be coming to view these things? What kind of context are they going to have about the war? You're all here benefiting from Miriam telling you all the behind-the-scenes stories and telling you everything about this war. But we were also trying to really be conscious of the fact that not only were these images designed for people in Spain who were illiterate, but we were thinking, okay, our audience might not necessarily know a lot about the Spanish Civil War. How do we communicate that idea as quickly as we can? So for this particular image, we have the image of holding hands. We have all the flags together. That motif was repeated in this postcard too. So there was a lot of intentionality about how do we match the images to the text. What are people actually going to be spending a lot of time looking at, and how do we make that as captivating?
Absolutely. And also it's kind of serendipitous and lovely that it's an outside exhibition space, because these posters were meant to be seen outside. We tried to keep more or less the proportion of the size, but of course we made some of the postcards larger so you can see the images better. But like the posters would have been maybe like this size or bigger. So just to imagine yourself, like there were people at the time writing in newspapers and being struck by the proliferation of the posters and saying that it was like a shout from the wall. I love that image. So that's sort of what also we were trying to do as well. Like choose images that would be most compelling, and then try to sort of give you a sense of what the visual experience could have been like. So we were talking about how this war was, sadly notable in the sense that this is where these mass civilian bombardments were implemented as a tool of warfare, And even though here it says like the youth will defend Catalonia, it says Day of the Youth, 14th to 21st of March. And then they talk about the rear guard in some cases, but in a way there wasn't a rear guard because the bombings were taking place in the civilian area. So there were a lot of atrocity postcards where you would see gruesome images or images of the buildings destroyed. Also, they were bombing, cultural institutions like the Prado Museum in Madrid got bombed. So, and then I also wanted to show you this little beauty here. This says, "Defend the Republic, write to your friends all over the world." You see this beautiful little hand putting a postcard in a post box, and that's the flag of the Catalan region of Spain. And it's actually interesting. We have a lot of them from Catalonia, because I think that they came through Catalonia when they entered Spain. They came through France, and then also they were going south to a place called Albacete, where they were trained and then sent off to the front. And they were in some of the battles that were more in that east side of Spain. And also, the Catalan government had the most sophisticated propaganda apparatus, and they were sort of a center for the print industry. So they already had infrastructure and incredible artists. And so we are lucky that we have a lot of their materials. Does anybody have any comments? So this was something that I think also people found very compelling who were providing humanitarian assistance, and that's that even though they were in the middle of a war, they were still maintaining some of their popular platforms, such as education. They built a lot of schools. They even made these avant-garde artists created these beautiful primers that were used at the front to teach the soldiers how to read and write. These are facsimile editions that were produced. And that's the poster advertising the reading and writing primer. And so you can see you fight against fascism. You fight by fighting ignorance. So they were really focused still, even in the middle of this horrible conflict, in the future and the democracy that they wanted to maintain in Spain. I find, being an educator myself, I find that to be very, very moving. These are like these little broadsheets that were produced, as you can see, in French, trying to get the French government to sort of rethink. Because what happened was that so the uprising happened in July 18, 1936. And then in August, a group of the Western democracies declared a non-intervention pact, which essentially was like, we're just leaving you to your own devices, but big corporations can send you money, like Ford can send you, whatever. And then Franklin Delano Roosevelt issued an embargo in January. So that meant we couldn't give any assistance of any kind, although there were humanitarian efforts that, were being carried out here by many people in the United States.
President Roosevelt.
Yes.
At that time, yeah.
It's true, yeah. And
it didn't do any good.
it didn't, and it was, and you know what I read actually, that in the trial of Ethel and
Rosenberg.
Yes, the Rosenberg. So one of the pieces of evidence was a little soda can with a little piece of paper wrapped around it saying "Help Spain." I don't know if it was the North American Committee to Aid. We have some material in another window. The North American Committee to Aid Spanish Democracy, but that was part of what they used to say. These people are communist spies, and look, they were fundraising. They were asking for pennies for the children in Spain. So when I read that, I thought that was just chilling. That whole generation is just so admirable. And then these, we have such a hard time picking because there's so many very, satirical, allegorical images. And here you can see, even if you don't speak Spanish or Catalan, or you know that these are villains, right? And you can see they're playing on some of them. They're fine artists, like I said, so they have a lot of artistic education. So they're playing on medieval allegories of the Ship of Fools, and then they're making them current. They're showing the different sectors of society that in large part supported the coup, the Catholic hierarchy. We called it a new crusade against communism, and also the North African mercenary troops that they deployed. To small, like loaded capitalists, these powerful, personal military man, and so they I think that they really created some very iconic images of the struggle, like this one. This is one that you see a lot, and these are very unusual. And this artist made very realistic battle paintings. He made cartoons that were also very sort of more legible, and then he made these allegories. They were prints, postcards, posters. They circulated widely, and they're just these monsters that indicate the different enemies within. So some of them are like the defeatist, the gossip, the hoarder, and like this one. This is the leftist. So the guy has he's transformed himself into this agitprop, being, and the clenched fist salute of the Popular Front. He's kind of coming out from all sides, but it's like he's protesting too much. In fact, there's a little bourgeois guy sitting inside of him. He's lying in wait. My grandfather's brother, my sister found something in an archive about him. He was talking about how one of the reasons he was sent to jail, that he was kind of an intelligence guy, and he was pointing out the ones that were behind enemy lines, and he was saying, that one, be careful with that one, he's actually not on our side. So that was a big thing, of course. It's a civil war, and people are just trapped behind the lines, and not everybody who was fighting was on our side.
From the perspective also just of our collection itself, I actually learned things about our collection through this class, and that I didn't realize we had this full series of postcards in the collection. It was in a section that I just hadn't really looked at. And I knew that we had pictures of these images, so I was able to actually pull those out, have them side by side for the students, so they could see how much of a propaganda effort this was. This wasn't just one type of media being used to communicate these ideas. They were able to see in real time, there are actually full-size posters of these. There are postcards. How do we engage with those differently? How did the people at the time engage with those differently? What does it mean that we actually have those people here? Why are they here? And we got to really dig into a lot of different questions that we otherwise might not have been able to. So I was really grateful to be able to see the complete set of this series, because I always said, there's definitely more than we just don't have the posters here. But seeing we have the postcards is a nice compliment to what we have.
And we're talking about thousands of pieces in this archive. So Jordana and I teach a Spanish art class, and so we go and take them there, show them the things, and the students are so fascinated to actually see something from the period. But there's still so much to be investigated and discovered. There's a lot of really great research. For example, the Abraham Lincoln Brigade was the first integrated U.S. military unit, and we had very prominent members of the brigade who were African American. We also had some people who came from Puerto Rico, Cuba, who were here and went to fight. We also had some incredible women who were driving trucks, nurses, and one of the nurses was African American, Salaria Key. So we have some material videos where so it's also very important that they, when they came back, they were referred to as premature anti-fascists, which is so perverse. And we have some letters, I'll show you in a second, where they were actually saying, please let us enroll. We want to fight against fascism again in World War II. We want to defend the U.S. democracy. And they were persecuted for decades and decades, especially during the Red Scare, for having participated in this, because it wasn't sanctioned by the U.S. government. I just think it's so perverse, premature anti-fascist. So these are just some of the materials that I was saying. These are some of the letters that were sent by a veteran to Franklin Delano Roosevelt, appealing, saying, please, I'd like to use my experience and fight for democracy a second time. And then these are the kinds of things that the North American Committee published, and they had pictures too, and they use these beautiful, very appealing images of these children who are orphaned, and where some of the things that they did was they actually they supported orphanages for the children, or children who were sent away by their parents for safety. And then this is, you can see it's like a recruitment kind of image of some of the veterans.
And I think this particular window is really important and was very interesting to the students because most of them don't learn about the Spanish Civil War in the American education system. It's skipped over completely. We just go straight from Great Depression into World War II. Absolutely nothing else happened in between. So they were really surprised to see this was actually something that was taking place in the United States. This is something that is part of our history as Americans, and we should be focusing on. So there was so much evidence about American intervention in the war because of the nature of our archives. It is about specifically the Abraham Lincoln Brigade, which were Americans who went over to fight. So sometimes the harder part was actually teasing out the Spanish side of the story because of the way that our archive is put together. But on the other hand, we did want to make sure to highlight the fact that this war did have an impact on the United States, despite what our traditional history curriculum may tell us. And to me, that just highlights the importance of bringing students into these spaces and bringing our undergraduates into the archives so that way they can continue to learn and support their history education.
And I think like after what happened on January the 6th too, this is even more relevant than it was in the show. We never would have perceived that in the United States someone would be trying to overturn a democratic election or incite violence at the Congress. So I think that, we need to learn from these historical examples. And as you said, this is part of U.S. history. So we're very lucky. So speaking of the children, there were many, many images, of course, of horrific, like this photo montage of a mother and her child, and then, it's very well chosen pieces to use for this montage of a building, the airplanes. But what's also incredible is that there's a lot of drawings made by the children, and so these are from a series of postcards, and the captions are in various languages, and so you can see the child, what the child has witnessed, which of course lends it more credibility than maybe other types of propaganda that was in question. But this little drawing here, that you see a little town, you see the church, looks very beautiful and typical, and then you notice the warplanes above. That's from a sketchbook that was made by children at an orphanage called the Ben Leiter House. Ben Leiter was an airman. He was the first person to die from the Abraham Lincoln Brigade in his life in Spain. And so the children made drawings to give to the parents, to thank the parents, because the parents gave money for the orphanage. So it's beautiful, this little booklet, and they're just, they write to the parents and how much they're so grateful to them, and then it's heartbreaking to see what the children are drawing, because they're very, very disturbing images of them. And it was interesting. Oh, and then this is a little book that it was made in, again, thanks to the propaganda commissariat in Catalonia, by this incredible writer, artist, Lola Lala. And she made this beautiful school, sort of storybook about this heroic little boy who was engaging with a lot of different debates in the rear and motivating people to fight. So he's kind of like they called him the mascot of the revolution. So he was kind of like the idea of the children are our future, and they even made like little dolls. They had a whole publicity campaign. They had posters, in photographs of children playing with the doll. They sold the doll to raise money. And the doll had like flags. So you get it while we wanted to show your national pride in Catalan. So this little guy has the Catalan flag. Or the anarchist one, all the different flags on the popular front. And the person who was in charge of the commissariat, just wrote about that and how they were kind of trying to like keep score to see which was the most popular, one, which was the Catalan flag actually. And this is a replica, but we have the original. And the reason we have it is because, what was his name? John Berman, right?
I believe so.
Yes. So he was a congressman from Minnesota. He was the only one that voted against the embargo. And he went to Spain, and they gave him a fancy version of this to give to FDR, because they were using it as a kind of diplomatic PR kind of thing. So he tried to give it to FDR, and FDR was like, It's like, don't even come near me with anything having to do. So in Spain, they were publishing articles saying, oh, FDR got this gift, blah, blah, blah. And I started digging and digging and digging. And it turned out that, you know, he had it and he donated it to the archive. And that's why we have the original one, which is this big. It's a beautiful movie.
He comes in a very adorable little commemorative case with the Catalonian flag wrapped around it.
Gorgeous.
He's so cute. I call him my little buddy.
Not told, which was hidden, which was destroyed, and so they want to keep a memento of it. So it's still something that is kind of like, you know, people, everyday people are still like kind of, you know, wanting to sort of have a souvenir of this. So this, I can't say which is my favorite, but I think this might be my favorite thing that we discovered.
I think this is your favorite thing.
This is
for
my
sure.
favorite thing. So Meredith Sid Graham was a commercial artist, and he went to Spain, and he got there in mid-March of 1936. No, 1937. Mid-March of 1937. And we have a sketchbook. Basically what he saw when he was going south to go to get trained and then go to the front. And you can see this is all written in Catalan, and there are all these little posters, and then this is the week of the Popular Army, the day of the fighter, you know, long lay of the Popular Army. So there are all these like beautiful posters, homage to the Unified Army. And then this is actually an incredible poster. We don't have it. We also don't have a postcard repro of it. And it's a swastika, but you can see it's personified as this man with like his head and arms akimbo, and then the hand of the worker with the hammer, you know. But it's kind of sad too, because you can see the page is not filled out. What happened was he actually died on July 18, 1937, so the 1-year anniversary of the coup. And I guess his comrades must have, you know, been able to safeguard his sketchbook, and so we have it. And it's just interesting because he was a commercial artist, so he was kind of relating it to his peers and seeing the revolutionary potential of his craft, you know, in a wartime situation. It's just my favorite thing ever.
This one is not to scale at all. This is much smaller than the actual poster. I always remember this one because when I first started working at the Tenement Library, there was a reproduction of it on one of the cubicles every morning when I would walk in, so I always remember seeing it there. So when we chose to put it in the exhibit, I was really happy to have that. But the actual poster is 2 full-size sides, so there's like a line right down the middle, and one half is on one side of the poster and one half is on the other, because that's how massive it is. It would probably go, I'd say, like from here over to where Miriam is standing, if we were actually to put these side by side. So we used a smaller version of it on a postcard to make our reproduction of it, so that way it's one continuous image, because even digitizing the posters would be too big for our scanner to handle. So it's a very, very large poster. It's very, very impactful. The V, Victoria, Victory. I think it's a really stunning image. I really like it a lot. I can't really totally speak to all of the history behind the image, but you can see a lot of symbolism on it. There's the Republic flag is on the wings of all of the planes. The line of planes coming out from the ground into the sky up towards that Victory. You've got an airman, again, looking up towards that Victory. It's a very hopeful image. There are light colors on it. It's something that promotes a lot of hope. And it's, I think, really very representative of the scale of the posters and the emotive aspect of the posters that we have in our collection.
We have at least a couple that I've seen that were folded. So you can see the creases, which is super interesting, that they somehow went to a workshop, got it before they were pasted on the wall, folded it up, and then took them with, which is pretty remarkable.
Yes.
And this is a pretty iconic one that is in a lot of other collections. And it's Spanish Center now. It's the Mr. Fine Arts Museum. A lot of posters showing graphic artists in Spain. So, and when this was made in 1938, they were already really in dire straits and they were losing the war. But he wrote an essay at this time saying that we needed to keep up people's morale, and instead of showing them all the disaster and the death and the horror, we needed to give them some kind of optimism. So he was doing what he said. We also found some really fascinating things that were geared towards the actual people that were fighting. There were, like I said, there were people who were behind the lines and they weren't on the side that they were stuck behind. Or they were just afraid because they saw that the war was being lost and they didn't, so eventually, like that one up at the middle, it says 1,000 volunteers. That was towards the end of the war. You can even see the paper is not very good. It's more like newsprint paper. It's colorful, the design value is not as high. But they were trying to really desperately get younger and younger and younger men to volunteer to go to the front or to recruit them. And then, like you can see this one, what have you done for victory? It says this man an amputated leg. So they're very like I don't know. I had never seen that in another archive. If any of you have ever seen it.
No, I was just going to say though that what's interesting is that in your collection, sorry, I'm so bundled. Posters like the one on the right is also in the MoMA collection, and Miriam's done a lot of interesting work on the fact that during the Civil War there was a small exhibition. You can speak to this, but that it's fascinating when you start seeing where all of this material is across the United States and how there are certain things that are repeated in different collections.
Yeah.
Which means they were also given a stronger force in terms of being exported out for propaganda play. It's not only individuals who brought them, but also kind of how those worked. And that's one of the images that happens to be, in Midtown in an art collection that found its way there in a very different way. So it's really interesting to think about that the same artifacts can exist and have gone into the collections in different manners.
Absolutely.
For the same time period.
And the North American Committee to Aid Spanish Democracy, they did do a lot of things having to do with the arts, like artists from the U.S. who were sympathetic, making work. They also organized the showing of Guernica here and left to Paris for his original for. And in the Museum of Modern Art, they did an exhibition of Spanish posters, and I didn't know why they were in the collection. I used to work there. I was like, why do they have all these posters, and why did they come in 1937? It turned out that the director bought the posters, again, kind of violating the embargo. He gave money to the North American Committee to Aid Spanish Democracy to get these beautiful posters. And the show was to teach people in the U.S., like, coming out of the WPA and everything, what a good poster should look like. In his mind, he thought that this was like the most sophisticated kind of school of graphic design and that they were really good at getting out the messages. And he wanted, since we were involved with the WPA, to sort of elevate the quality of this, using his language, of our posters, which is another interesting art historical thing that people don't necessarily talk about.
Yeah, and then talking about how these posters really echo throughout different collections in the United States, I also think of the way that they echo throughout time. This postcard right in the center, you can see it kind of has this like weird design on the bottom of it. This is a reprint. It's not something that was original to the 1930s, so it wasn't one of the postcards that they might have been distributing at that time, but it gets students and it gets other people wondering, when was this reproduced? Why was this reproduced? Why are we focusing on the Spanish Civil War at that moment in history? It's not dated, so we don't have a whole lot of context as to when it was reproduced, but just the fact of knowing that it was a reproduction that's not original to the 1930s, it gets you to start really asking questions about what is this doing in this archive then, and what is it? How does that add to the story in a different kind of way?
One of the big sort of priorities of the Popular Front was also agrarian reform, because Spain had a very almost like feudal system, and there were aristocrats who owned massive amounts of properties, and people were working in these inhumane conditions. So that was a big mobilizing force, not just the labor unions, but also the countryside was a big sort of rallying cry for them. So there's a lot of like beautiful images like this one up here of the very like handsome man, you know, sowing the seeds. Kind of a little over-determined image here, like sowing the seed of the future. And so some of these postcards too, like we were saying before, they get reproduced. Like some of them were also posters, and then they would reproduce them as postcards to just kind of reinforcing the message and maybe creating spaces for more intimate conversation. Like for example, in the war, they had in the forces they had political commissars, and the political commissars were basically providing political education and trying to foster cohesion among the troops, and they were embedded with the troops, and so things like that I think would have been probably used, and as well as then allowing them to send it to their families.
Yeah, and one of the things that I find really interesting, particularly about that poster, is I've been teaching it with it quite a bit over the past couple of weeks because it's in a folder that's very easy to get at. There have been classes that are not necessarily focused on the Spanish language, or just classes that are generally about archives, introducing students to what an archive is and how it works. That poster is the one that all the students gravitate towards because they're just so struck by this farmer. And I just think that really speaks to the success of the poster and how well it is designed, because almost 100 years later, it's still very visually striking. The students have so many questions. What is he doing there? Why doesn't he have his shirt on? What's going on? What is the context of this? What do you mean it's from the 1930s? And they're just so fascinated. And I just keep thinking about this man in particular in the 1930s posing for this photograph, thinking he was helping the war effort, which he was, but now also having this new life in New York City, which couldn't be further from him in that moment in time. And it still resonates with people. It's still interesting to people visually. They're curious about it, and so the poster is still accomplishing what it meant to do, even though it's no longer in its original context. And I just think that's such a lovely example of archives and the success of what they can do.
So it's definitely Instagram worthy.
Yes.
You could probably get a lot of likes on it. Now I don't know how many of you saw that movie, The Monuments Men. Did any of you see that movie? Oh, you read the book. So you know how during World War II, again, when Europe was getting bombed, so many people in different countries collaborated to try to save works of art that were either on the verge of being destroyed by the Nazis or looted by the Nazis. And they learned from the Spanish, because actually the Spanish created some protocols for saving works of art, packing them, storing them, moving them. They took the contents of the Prado Museum, and in the middle of a war getting bombed, they put them in trucks and brought them down to Valencia, another important city in the east of Spain, the southeast of Spain. But they also were struggling with some internal issues, because some members of the coalition, like the anarchists, saw religious items or luxury items as symbols of the oppressors, and so they wanted to destroy them. Like they had this idea, well, let's destroy their ideology in any way that they have to transmit it, or just out of anger, I think, and frustration. So there was a lot of, unfortunately, destruction or damage sustained, especially by religious monuments. And so they one of the things that they did was they created a campaign to educate people and say, the people who made these are workers like you, and this is your wealth, this is your national history, this belongs to you. Do not destroy it. So this is one of the beautiful posters from one of those campaigns that was issued by the Ministry of Public Instruction and Fine Arts, and you can see it says Pueblo, people. So before you destroy any object whose value you do not know, get some information. It might be a work of art, and by destroying them you destroy your own wealth. So they were kind of trying to, use a little bit contradictory language here if people are kind of anti-capitalist, but that is a really important part of like the propaganda abroad. Also was kind of focusing on the cultural patrimony, which of course we know now too. With what's happening in Ukraine, there's a lot of discussion about all of the different things that have been destroyed, sadly.
It's a little bit like today's cancel culture.
In what way?
Well, these things belong to the bad colonialists.
Oh, I
destroy
see.
Everything.
I see.
Yeah.
This was in honor of a sculptor who died at the front. So they used this. They said his name was Emiliano Barral, and so it says his work, his life, and his death are a symbol. Let's follow his example, because there were a lot of these artists, also were involved in the fighting themselves, or as administrators, like I said, like Giuseppe Rinaldi, the minister of fine arts, and towards the end of the war, some of them were drafted. But during the war, I think a lot of the artists saw themselves as fighters through their art and through their pedagogical kind of practice. This picture here, this was actually reproduced in an article about the Abraham Lincoln Brigade, and I think it was the New Yorker. Was it the New Yorker? I think it was the New Yorker. But it's a picture that actually includes a number of the NYU students who volunteered. There were 22 of them. Actually, if you're interested in learning about the individual veterans, this QRT, if you take a photo of it with your phone, it'll take you to their archival database. They've done phenomenal research. Sadly, none of them are with us now. Well, they're here with us in spirit, but they've all passed away. But luckily, they were debriefed. There was oral histories that were made. Also, a phenomenal documentary called The Good Fight. You can actually see this on YouTube, and I highly recommend it, because they interviewed a lot of the people for that film. So anyway, this is a photograph that includes some of our students. Some of them were undergrads, and then there was like one from the law school that went to fight. So that was also, I think, really striking for us to think about, that people who would be the age that the students are now, and that they would be going to this war in a country that wasn't theirs, because of their ideals. It's kind of shocking, I guess, to think about that. And this image here, the Belchite in memory of Harry Meloff. This was a big event that was held in memory of one of the veterans. So they have things like magazines, broadsheets, sort of like flyers. So it's not just posters and postcards. They also have things like a nurse's cape. We have some pretty unusual. And this is a beautiful poster in honor of the International Brigade. Like I said, there was 59,000 people from all over the world, from China, from everywhere. Like my native Puerto Rico, from Puerto Rico. So this is a really beautiful image of the figure of the Spanish Republic, kind of almost like a Virgin Mary figure in a way, like her mother, kind of with her arms around the volunteers. They have this kind of triangular shape here. That's their emblem. And this here, it says Paths of Glory. This beautiful photo montage, it's talking about the different battles that they fought. They fought at some of the most important battles in the war, the most strategic fronts, like Teruel or the Battle of the Ebro. They were extremely brave, and they had heavy casualties. So they were really very important in terms of the war effort.
And what to me is so compelling about this particular window and about the Abraham Lincoln Brigade itself is I really see it as a really important moment in community archive. This was a community. It was spread out over time. A lot of the members had to go into hiding during the 1950s at the height of McCarthyism. Many of them were called in front of UAC. There was a lot of fear. There was a lot of shame in some ways surrounding families who knew that their family members might have been communists and didn't want to be associated with that. So there was a really high chance that a lot of this history had been lost. But it was thanks to the efforts of Frederick Martin, whose nurse's cape we actually have in our collection, in our archives, that she really tried to hold this community together. She wrote a lot of letters. We have her papers in the archive that not only show her work that she did in the war, but the work that she did in creating this archive and getting veterans and oh, who else are you going to touch with in the old days who might know? She did a lot of this work in the 70s, so it's like 40 years after the war is already over. She's able to successfully bring this collection together, get it over to Brandeis University, where they took care of the collection for many, many years and continued to grow and take care of it until they were no longer able to, unfortunately. And it was at that moment in the 1990s, thanks to some of the efforts of the KJCC as well, and the work of NYU Libraries, we were able to bring the collection into our repository where it has stayed and has continued to grow ever since then. So it's really got this really wonderful history trajectory of starting with the community being such a important part of their story that Frederick or did not love this. And because of that, we now have the ability to tell this entire story, or at least one facet of the story of the Spanish Civil War, thanks to all the work that she did.
And it's so important because, like I said, I was very lucky that I was able to actually hear many of them speak and be at different events. And even during the war in Iraq, there was a big protest, and they would always show up at all the protests. And there would be a banner that would say Veterans of Abraham Lincoln Brigade. And my sister knew